am Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream. Today, 2 updates on stories we've been keeping an eye on.
Coming up, a look at what's developing in Venezuela, a country consumed by economic and political chaos.
And then the latest on the burkini ban in France. The conversation has been heating up on and offline, and our community has a lot to say. First, though, to Venezuela.
After 17 years of socialist rule, Venezuela has the world's highest inflation rate, a mountain of foreign debt, and an increasing shortage of basic goods. Tumbling oil prices shattered its economy, and violent demonstrations are now common. Following the death of President Hugo Chavez in 2013, his successor, Nicolás Maduro, failed to address the country's economic decline. When the situation worsened, protests became nationwide. On December 6, 2015, Maduro's party was defeated in a parliamentary election. A new opposition majority in the National Assembly now promises to end Venezuelan socialism once and for all. They seek a referendum within 6 months to vote on revoking the president's mandate.
The petition for that referendum now has more than 1.8 million signatories calling for President Maduro to face a vote. A nationwide rally is planned for September the 1st by the opposition coalition. But the president is lashing back, sacking all civil servants who were involved in the petition. Meanwhile, lines for rations are long, supermarkets are empty, hospitals are short on life-saving medicines, and Venezuelans are leaving the country in record numbers. So to discuss the latest, we're joined by Emiliana Duarte. She is a blogger at the Caracas Chronicles, and Gabriel Hetland is Assistant Professor of Latin American Studies at the University at Albany State University of New York. Malika, where should we start?
Oh, Femi, I want to start with this story we got. It's pretty touching, so I think it's a good start from Felix, who's Venezuelan. He tweets into the stream, "I've lived there until about 4 months ago, and I can say that my country is devastated." He goes on to say, "My family has to spend hours in a queue to buy a limited amount of food weekly, the same for soap, shampoo, or sanitary towels. I decided to leave the day I couldn't bring milk for my daughter. I feel better now, but my parents still suffer along with the country." Emiliana, you hear this story from Felix, who left. You were last on our show talking about how hard things were at the end of May. How have things changed? Has it gotten worse?
Yes, things have gotten worse in Venezuela, both in economic terms, in political terms, and in humanitarian terms. Inflation has only risen since the last time we spoke. Shortages have only gotten worse since the last time we spoke. And unfortunately, the referendum, which is, I think, the only escape valve that institutionally is left in order for social conflictivity not to take over, has been systematically blocked by the national government. So yes, there's a lot of devastation, a lot of desperation. There was a story this morning in the paper headlining about an 18-month-old baby who died of starvation in the state of Zulia. And unfortunately, these stories of people going hungry or only eating once a day. Oh, another big one is we're currently in holidays right now, school holidays, yet schools in the state of Miranda are remaining open only so that children may be able to eat. And it's usually the only meal they get daily.
Gabriel, I'm just going to show our audience watching this an article that you wrote back in June, and it says, "How severe is Venezuela's crisis?" The answer you gave in June, would it be different than the answer you're giving today?
It would be a little bit different
What's
today.
different?
I do think, as Emiliana has said, that when I was in Venezuela in June, the crisis was getting worse over time. But I think the thrust of my article from June remains the same in the sense that the images we see in the mainstream media, including the open images that we've seen here, are of Venezuela in utter collapse, a sort of apocalyptic situation. There's no denying that they are in the midst of a very severe, very deep, and very painful crisis. So I'm in absolute agreement with that. I think that there's plenty of blame for the government with respect to that. But the crisis in June, and I would imagine the same is true today, is not as bad as the mainstream images make it seem. So let me give a couple quick examples of that.
Yeah.
For instance, in the New York Times, they've said that hospitals in Venezuela appear to be hell on earth. So that just provides an image of a sort of war-torn country, something like Iraq or Syria, a place that's utterly, utterly devastated. When I was in Venezuela, I talked to people, including opposition supporters, who spoke about going to free public health clinics and said that they had recently been to public health clinics that were good. It doesn't mean that the healthcare system is functioning perfectly. It doesn't mean that there's not severe problems there, but it's different than the image of it being hell on earth. Another example is that in a New York Times story.
Were you in Caracas? Were you talking about the healthcare centers in Caracas or in the rest of the interior of the country?
I traveled to Caracas, various parts of Caracas. I was also in Carora. In a trip in December, I traveled to Nueva Esparta. So I've been to various parts of Venezuela. And clearly there are differences. And I think that's an excellent point, Emiliana, that it's important not to take particular examples and act like that's what's happening in the whole country. But I really don't want to minimize the pain and suffering. It's true, there is a lot of pain and suffering. It's unnecessary. It should be stopped. And the government deserves a lot of blame for what's happening, although not only the government. Some of the reasons for the crisis right now have to do with really poor government policies, in particular with respect to the currency, but some of the blame also goes to the opposition and to the United States government, which have been taking actions which make it harder for Venezuela to recover. So having the idea that this crisis is completely the fault of the government and that it's the worst thing in the world, that Venezuela is the worst place to be in the world, I think are just not accurate.
So Gabriel, Gabriel talked about where
years.
to put the blame. Emiliana, I want to give this video comment to you because it segues with Gabriel saying where he puts the blame. This is Claudia. She talks about those mixed messages and where she puts her blame. Have a listen.
On the radio, I've heard constant commercials of a company who brings overpriced medicines from other countries due to scarcity in Venezuela. But in other radio stations, there are members of the government assuring that there's no crisis, that Venezuela is growing, and that all this chitter-chatter about scarcity is an imperialist economic war. The current situation in Venezuela is very rough, but the government's attitude of denial is simply intolerable.
So an attitude of denial, is that something you can recognize?
Absolutely, absolutely. Denial of the fact that our economy has contracted over 11% since last year in the same period. Denial of the fact that in the first 7 months of this year, there's been over 509 reported cases of looting. Just in July, there were over 200 protests reported nationwide. Not to mention the fact that there are over 90 political prisoners right now being detained illegally all over Venezuela. And the fact that, I mean, it really doesn't take that much in order to peer out from your window and understand that there's lines outside of every supermarket that you look at. And the fact that people perish in hospitals from completely preventable causes, such as not being able to find dialysis machines, or not being able to find insulin for your diabetes, or not being able to find antiretrovirals for your HIV, or even just basic antibiotics, which is one of the leading causes of death in children.
So I'm wondering, Emiliana and Gabriel, if this might be the way that Venezuelans are actually pushing back. Here's a headline from Al Jazeera: Maduro referendum. Venezuelans line up to back recall. On social media, people are sharing pictures of people just lining up here, lots and lots of people here, close up here, to sign a petition. Gabriel, now you're calling out the mainstream media for maybe exaggerating what's happening in Venezuela, but when you see these lines, when you see the push for the petition, for there to be a vote against Maduro, how do you analyze that?
I think it's undoubtable that there's a lot of genuine and understandable critique of the government right now. The government has not solved the policies. I do think that the economic war story is partly true, although it's absolutely true that the government has exaggerated the idea that the economic war is the only thing to blame. I think government errors are definitely the main problem that's happening right now, although it's hard to sort of extricate those. So all that's to say that it makes sense why people are really frustrated with the government and why there's a lot of support for that. I would say that I don't have a whole lot of hope in terms of the opposition because they haven't put forward a plan of what they would do if they got into power. They've given various reasons for that, saying that we can't have economic change without political change. But when I go to grassroots communities, there's not a lot of popular support for opposition leaders and for the opposition in general. I think there's been a modest growth of that support over the months, and there's certainly been a decline in support for the government. But there's a lot of sort of distrust of all political parties, of all politics right now. And it's a very, very difficult and challenging situation.
Let me check in with Emiliana via what I'm seeing again on social media, which is people counting down to a big rally happening on September the 1st. If you could kind of take a sense and give us a sense of what is happening, the atmosphere in the country, how would you explain it, Emiliana? Or different regions?
Faced with the systematic blockage of what is a constitutional right, which is the right to petition for a recall referendum, and the process for doing so is clearly laid out in the Constitution and in the law. Faced with a
I would
constant
just jump in and say that there hasn't been a systematic blockage of the constitutional right. The referendum has gone
and you only have
forward,
to compare.
and each of the different steps have been followed. The opposition also waited until April. So I don't deny that there's reasons to critique the government, but I think that that's an inaccurate characterization.
On September 1st. And the objective of this protest is to demand that the National Electoral Authority put a date on the referendum's next phase, which is to be able to collect 20% of the signatures of 20% of the electorate, which is around 4 million Venezuelans. And I believe the fear that the government has, and the reason why it hasn't gone forth with this, is because they know that if 4 million people sign against the government, they will not be able to justify their support base anymore, because it's been completely eroded. It'll be proof positive that Maduro has no popular support whatsoever.
Sure.
So this march on September 1st, of course, you know, it's the first time in many years that the opposition has called for a street protest of such a magnitude with such ample time, such anticipation, and it's in order to garner as much support as possible. And of course, you know, the government has responded with threats. Public employees are being threatened. There's reports of public employees already having been fired because they signed in the referendum. Just last night, Diosdado Cabello, who is a government MP, openly threatened public employees that he knew would be going to the march with being fired. And there's a lot of fear-mongering, lots of intimidation, and just the usual propaganda warning against violence. Violence would only really benefit the government. And this entire protest has always been in the context of peaceful, democratic protest.
Emiliana Duarte, Gabriel Hetland, I'm going to say thank you so much for keeping us up to date here. Of course, we cannot do an entire update in just a few minutes or half a show, but thank you for your insight. We will check back with you in future months and keep abreast of what's happening in Venezuela. And now we move to France.
French politicians are surfing on the burkini waves to not only legitimate and institutionalize anti-Muslim sentiment, but also to reinforce the idea that women cannot decide for themselves. And this is extremely problematic and clearly a blatant violation of human rights.
Well, as you just heard, France is in a bit of a brouhaha over what some women are wearing to the beach. Mayors in a number of beach towns have banned the burkini. Well, burkini is the name for a body and head covering swimsuit worn by some Muslim women for its modest appeal. Well, the debate is particularly sensitive because in 2010, France banned the full face veil. And some say the latest move is another example of the country's increasing Islamophobia. On Friday, France's highest administrative court will rule on a request by a human rights group for the burkini ban in the town of Villeneuve-Loubet to be overturned. To discuss the latest, we're joined now by Shainez Hasnaoui, a law student at the University of Lille, and Esma Uddin, Director of Strategy at the Center for Islam and Religious Freedom, and the founding editor-in-chief at Alt Muslima. Welcome to the stream.
Ladies, via Shainez, I'm going to get you to take us to the beach. I'm going to show everybody your homemade beach outfit. As I show them the picture, talk us through what you did here.
So I basically took a legging, a pants like you can buy it in a sport shop, with a very large t-shirt, and it's specially to go to the beach or to be in the water. And it's my way to cover myself and just enjoy the beach with my friend or my family.
Have you had any issues wearing that outfit to the beach?
No, I didn't, because I wear in Spain. So in Spain beaches, I didn't have any problem. But then coming back to France, I knew that finally I could not go to southern France beaches.
All right. So this story that made the headlines this week, your initial reaction was what?
I was like, it's a step more to an establishment of an Islamophobia politic. And knowing that presidential elections are coming in 2017, I was sure that the main debate for this presidential election will be Islam again, and how women, Muslim women, will wear and how they can, what we authorize and what we don't want to see in French society.
You know, Shaynaz, what's interesting is that this debate and what you're talking about is one that's pretty much lit up almost the entire world. Take a look at my screen here. This is a heat map our team put together using two hashtags that people are using, which is burkini ban, you see that in the yellow, and burkini in the purple. More than 300,000 tweets. This is just over the past 2 days when this really heat up. But Esma, as part of that conversation, we do hear things like this. This is a tweet from, the handle is Haram Lives Matter, saying it's 100% a good thing, this burkini ban, to protect European values. Someone else says this is a way for them to preserve their cultural identity in France, which is, ironically, he says, the excuse that Muslim women give to justify their use of it. What do you say to people who say this is just France protecting their values?
Well, I think there's a false dichotomy being made between being French and being Muslim or any other religious identity. Is it possible to be both? And where and how do you create that sort of hybrid identity?
Let me show you something, because we wanted to find out exactly why these bans were being put in place. I believe there are about 15 towns so far around France that have a burkini ban, which is more about the outfit rather than the actual the way the outfit is put together. So it might not necessarily be an actual burkini. It may be just a long-sleeved outfit like the one I showed Shaynaz. So Alexandre Maggio is a spokesman for the city of Saint-Laurent-du-Var in France. And he said to us, this is the statement he gave us, these decisions are motivated by the desire to encourage coexistence without ulterior political motive. He says that, and Shaynaz, you say what in response?
I would say, how can we coexist banning people from the society? So basically in France, women cannot work wearing a hijab. They cannot go to school wearing a hijab. They can just wear it at university. So now we cannot work, we cannot study, we cannot go to the beach either. So what's the next step? You can't be in your own country. I'm French and I'm Muslim. I can be both. And I don't have any other country to go. So now, if I want to go on holidays and have a sunbath with my family or my friends, I have to move from France to go to another country, another European country. And that's the beginning of a general banning of Muslim people, and I think of Muslim women especially.
Shaynaz, I want to share something with you that Hind Meki tweeted in. She says, I genuinely don't believe this ban is about France liberating women. It's about their inability to view Muslim citizens as equals. And her point, she says, is that France can't have it both ways. They can't say that they're a liberal democracy while also denying full rights to some citizens. What do you think the underlying message behind the ban is? And then what is it actually meaning to you and your friends?
For me, it's really telling that we accept your religion, but it's a private fact. We don't want to see your religion. We don't want to see any symbol of your religion. So we don't say anything to you as you're Muslim, but don't show us your religion. So the hijab and the burkini are seen like a symbol of proselytism, as a symbol like we want to convert people or we want to impose our principle, but that's not. We are just living and trying to find the perfect balance between our religion from a part and our French way of life from another part. Sorry.
Asma, I'm just going to scroll down some pictures. These pictures appeared in the Daily Mail, but they've been over a lot of different papers. Talk us through what you see, what you feel as you look at these pictures. Beach in Nice.
Well, I mean, I think there's a personal element there, because if I were to go to the beach, I would wear something very similar to a burkini. And so when I look at these pictures and I look at the way that, you know, this public disrobing, this embarrassment, and then if you read the news articles that go with it, it describes the jeering that accompanied it by the other beachgoers, basically saying that that's not welcome, in France, and that she is an outsider. So there's both this this sort of vulgarity and as well as this deep humiliation. And so I think of that in personal terms, and I think about what I would feel if I was in that position. And so it strikes me at that level. It strikes me also just as a woman, and this idea that the government can step in and decide what is right or wrong for me as a woman. And I think that all women can relate to that, regardless of what our decisions are about dress. This idea the government comes in with this coercive power and strips us of our autonomy is something that is deeply problematic for me. And then as a lawyer specializing in religious liberty, I'm deeply troubled by it because it's singling out not just of religious women, but specifically of Muslim women. It's a very specific targeted law that's targeting Muslim religious appearance. And so, there's others have been tweeting images of Catholic nuns in full habit on the beach. And the idea that one sort of form of modesty is acceptable and another is not, whether it be other religious forms or other secular forms, that strikes me as deeply problematic.
It's interesting you say that. Here's one of those tweets that people are sharing. This person says, just to be clear, only one of these is illegal to wear on the beach in France. You see a wetsuit there. You also see a burkini, and then you see a nun in her habit also on the beach. But I want to share something with you, Shainaz, based on what Asma said about women often being able to relate to government telling them what to do. This is our cartoon by Khalid El-Bey. And you can see here a woman being told to do by two differently dressed groups of men. He writes, women in France are having their liberties stripped in the name of freedom, while others in the name of religion. So with that said, Shainaz, I want to throw this at you. This is one of the criticisms we got from people. This is Michael, and he says, you don't want to fit in with our culture, then stay out. Can a Christian wear a cross in Saudi Arabia? What would you say to that, Shainaz?
I would say that Saudi Arabia is not a democratic republic. It's a monarchy. I would say an Islamic monarchy. France is a secularist republic. So if we compare these both kinds of regime, it's absolutely not the same thing. So if we want to compare France to Saudi Arabia or Iran also, because I've heard a lot of comparison with Iran, that means that France finally is imposing a religion, a secularist religion, because France do not accept that people wear hijab in these lands. So it's just a kind of a secularist religion also. And I feel it like that because I respect people's religion, but the state do not respect my religion. And I have to adapt myself, to adapt my suit everywhere where I want to go. So to university, to high school, to beach, and I just wonder what will be the next step.
Janice, I'm just wondering, just to wrap up here, what is the atmosphere like in France? There's a headline I'm seeing right here which says, French official threatens lawsuit over widely shared bikini ban photos. So what is it like as you go about your daily life? And you're obviously Muslim.
Of course, it's being more and more difficult because we are hearing Islamophobic speeches being more accepted, people speak more freely. So we have to once again find the balance between being a citizen, a French citizen, and to respect other people's conviction and to respect the fact that they don't like Muslim, but at the same time we have to keep on practicing our religion, to keep on being ourselves without making people believe that we want to convert them or just to impose our religion in this country. We can't do both, but it's becoming harder to find the balance between both things.
Sure, I understand. Shaznaz Hasnawi and Asma Udin, thank you very much for giving us your insight into the bikini ban story in France. Malika.
Of course, I will end here. Two comments. Sharon says, our culture of freedom is getting more and more covered up by narrow-minded customs. And the other side, Susie says, it seems like policemen in France should have something better to do. Let us know what stories you'd like us to update or keep an eye on. #AJStream.